Now let's get some more expert reaction to this week's extraordinary events. Justine Greening joins us now. Justine was former Education Secretary and Conservative MP who stood down due to issues around Brexit and indeed Boris Johnson's leadership. Justine, good afternoon.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, Justine. I mean, where do you think things are now? I mean, are you just watching on aghast? Do you think the Conservative Party has any way of turning things round?
I think there's always a chance you can turn things around. To have two leadership contests within a year clearly is a real mess to the party. There's no other way of putting it. I think the key now for me is to recognise as a party that it's not just about the personalities, and that any time Boris Johnson is part of the debate, it is going to be about the personalities. But behind that is something much more fundamental, which is what's the purpose of this Conservative administration? What is it trying to accomplish? For me, that's a really straightforward answer, which is levelling up. It's the big majority that Boris Johnson got in 2019. Liz Truss's big mistake was to think she could somehow completely reinterpret what that majority was. She couldn't, and I think that's partly why she's not in number 10 today. But the big question for the Conservative Party is almost less about the personalities and who can get on with who. They have to be able to get on with one another, frankly. It's more about what are they actually trying to achieve on behalf of Britain regarding levelling up, and how are they now going to do that? And we're going to have, it seems, you listen to people like Jeremy Hunt, some belt tightening on our public finances. But how can you do that effectively? How can you work out the right mission critical spend if you don't know what the mission is? That, I think, is actually the most important question that Conservative parliamentarians have got to answer.
And you make a very important and a very powerful point, Justine, because as you say, there's a lot of focus on the kind of psychodrama and the personalities, and it has been, it's been a sort of plot line that even probably the House of Cards writers would have balked at. But this thing about policy and the economy is incredibly important, because let's say Boris Johnson does come back, as you say. Part of his appeal, the big positive policy thing he had was levelling up. And yet we are now going to have to go back into some period of austerity. You can't have those two policies running at the same time. I mean, how do you think a new Boris Johnson premiership copes with the fact that he is the man known for boosterism? He wants to do more public spending. He wants to do levelling up. And yet the OBR, the Treasury, the markets will say to him, you've got to rein it in.
I don't think it is either or, actually. I think that the challenge that Britain has got is weak productivity, but that's an outcome of weak social mobility. The fact we don't have equality of opportunity, the fact that where people start tends to be where they stay in life. It's breaking that cycle that is absolutely the key to getting our economy on track for the long term. And what the markets want to see, and I think it's been very interesting listening to leading economic commentators, is they don't necessarily want to see a round of austerity. What they want is a long-term plan to improve productivity and growth. And that is not the same. And I think the big risk for the party is that if we just look at simply, quote unquote, day-to-day spend and how we can reduce that in order to cut our cloth, the problem is a lot of that so-called day-to-day spend is actually investment in the very thing that is going to get our economy on track for the long term, which is people
and skills.
And so you have this false distinction between capital spend on roundabouts and roads and rail versus apparently day-to-day spend on things that are not as strategic to Britain, which is health and education, welfare, prisons, etc. And I think the political system has to now recognise that actually the money markets, a pound is a pound. And so the big question is, how can you have that investment plan that tilts towards driving stronger social mobility, equality of opportunity, and in doing so, puts our country on a surer economic foundation, because it's lives that are off track that cost the taxpayer money, not lives that are on track. So the way to right-size our ship is to get lives on track.
Well, I hope all the leadership candidates were listening to that, because I think you've just spoken a lot of sense. But Justine, who would you like to see take over?
Well, we don't know who's in it yet, do we? Let's face it. It looked like Boris was flying back to enter this race, and now as we talk, maybe he's not. But I think whoever it is, they have got to sort out a credible.
But Justine, it does.
The markets on social mobility.
Do you think Rishi Sunak could do that? Well, I mean, he looks like he's the front runner at the moment, according to the numbers coming in. Although if Boris Johnson gets on the ticket, that's a different question. Do you think Rishi Sunak could, has the same vision as you?
I don't know, but he has got to. He has got to do this, because it's not just about what's right for the country. There is this issue, of course, that everyone's talking about pulling the parliamentary party together. Levelling up is the one thing that every single MP in the Conservative Party agrees on. So I think we need to recognise that you pull the party together again, not necessarily through the person, but through the purpose of what it's trying to achieve. And that, for me, I think if we can bear that in mind, then yeah, maybe there is a route through on all of this, but the clock is definitely ticking.
Well, great to have you on the show, Justine. Thanks very much for your time. That's Justine Greening, former Conservative MP and former Conservative Education Secretary.